I sat there, gripping a crystal flute, while my father announced to the room that my brother, Mason, was the only future the Brooks family needed. I thought I had lost everything in a single toast. I was wrong. The real loss happened the next morning, when the company's $5.1 million lifeline vanished, proving that my father's cruelty had a price tag even he couldn't afford. The linen tablecloth felt cool under my fingertips, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat rising in my chest. We were seated in the private dining room of the Gilded Oak, the kind of establishment in Harbor Glen where the lighting was always dim enough to hide a frayed cuff, but bright enough to catch the sparkle of a diamond solitaire. It was my father's 70th birthday, and the air smelled of roasting duck, expensive cologne, and ancient, unspoken grievances. I was 33 years old. I had spent the last decade of my life quietly managing the turbulence of the Brooks family, smoothing over public relations disasters and ensuring that Brooks Crown Manufacturing remained a pillar of the community. I was the one who remembered the birthdays of the board members. I was the one who stayed late to double-check the compliance reports when the auditors came sniffing around. I was the responsible daughter, the reliable one, the one who, in my naive heart, believed that meritocracy still held some currency in a family business built on iron and sweat. My father, Franklin Brooks, stood up at the head of the table. He tapped his spoon against his champagne flute. The sharp crystal chime cut through the low murmur of conversation. 20 faces turned toward him. There were cousins I only saw at weddings and funerals, a few senior executives who looked like they would rather be anywhere else, and my brother, Mason. Mason sat to my father's right. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, and he had that relaxed, heavy-lidded look of a man who has never truly feared a consequence in his life. His wife, Elena, sat beside him, her posture rigid, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. "Thank you all for coming," Franklin said. His voice was deep, gravelly, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. He looked good for 70, though I noticed the way his knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table. 70 years is a long time. It gives a man time to think, to reflect on what he has built, and more importantly, who will carry it forward. I took a sip of water. I expected the usual platitudes, a vague promise about the future, a nod to the team. "We live in uncertain times," Franklin continued, his gaze drifting over the room but sliding right past me. "The market is shifting. The wolves are always at the door. To survive, a family must speak with one voice. It must have one head." He paused. The room went dead silent. A waiter froze in the corner, holding a water pitcher. "That is why," Franklin said, his voice gaining a sudden, forceful volume. "I have decided to end the speculation tonight. It is time to secure the Brooks legacy. As of this month, I am designating Mason as the sole successor to the estate and the executive leadership of Brooks Crown Manufacturing. He deserves the entire estate. He is the only suitable heir to protect what we have built." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sole successor. Deserves the entire estate. I did not gasp. I did not drop my fork. I simply stopped breathing for 10 seconds. It felt as if someone had reached into my chest and turned off a switch. The humiliation was not a wave. It was a needle, thin and incredibly long, piercing straight through my composure. The applause started slowly, driven by Elena, who clapped with a fervor that bordered on violent. Then the executives joined in, their hands moving with the mechanical obedience of men who needed to keep their bonuses. I looked at Mason. He didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied. He nodded to the room, a gracious king accepting his crown, while Elena squeezed his hand so hard her knuckles looked like polished stones. They knew. They had known before we even walked through the doors. I felt the heat rising in my neck. I could feel the eyes of the room darting toward me and then quickly away. They were looking for the crack. They were waiting for the responsible daughter to finally break. My cousin Sarah, seated across from me, reached out and touched my wrist. Her face was twisted into a mask of pity that was far worse than malice. "It makes sense, Vivi," she whispered, loudly enough for 3 other people to hear. With the manufacturing side being so gritty, it is a man's world, really. I pulled my wrist back. Enjoy your wine, Sarah, I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. I am just saying, she continued, oblivious. You will be free now. You can finally get married. Focus on your own life. I stood up. The chair scraped softly against the carpet. Excuse me, I said to the table at large. I need to use the restroom. Franklin did not look at me. He was busy shaking the hand of the chief operating officer, accepting congratulations for erasing his daughter from the family history. I walked out of the private room, keeping my spine straight, my chin up. I navigated the maze of tables in the main dining area, ignoring the curious glances of strangers. I pushed through the heavy oak door of the restroom and locked myself in the furthest stall. I did not cry. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the door latch and breathed. In, out, in, out. I had spent 33 years trying to earn a place at that table, and in 3 minutes, my father had handed it to a man who once called me from a Vegas jail cell because he had lost his corporate credit card during a bender. The restroom door opened. 2 women walked in. I recognized the voices immediately. Sheila, the VP of Human Resources, and arguably the biggest gossip in Harbor Glen, and Marcus, the VP of Sales. It was a unisex luxury restroom with floor-to-ceiling stalls, and they clearly thought they were alone. I thought I was going to choke on my steak, Sheila said. Her voice was a harsh whisper. Did you know he was going to say that? No one knew, Marcus replied. The water ran in the sink. The board certainly didn't approve this. I spoke to Gideon yesterday. He thought the succession plan was on hold until next fiscal year. Franklin is losing it, Sheila said, announcing it now, with the partner situation hanging by a thread. My ears pricked up. The partner situation. Keep your voice down, Marcus snapped. If that gets out, we are finished. It is insane timing, Sheila insisted. Mason can barely read a balance sheet without getting a headache. If the silent partner gets wind that Mason is the sole captain of the ship, that money is gone. And if that money goes... We are not going to talk about this here, Marcus said. Fix your lipstick. We have to go back in there and act like this is the greatest news since the invention of the assembly line. The door opened and closed. Silence returned to the tiled room. I stood there in the stall, the humiliation fading, replaced by a cold, vibrating curiosity. The partner situation. Brooks Crown Manufacturing had always been a private entity, but we had investors. Specifically, we had a silent partner. I knew the general structure, a massive capital injection 5 years ago that had allowed us to modernize the factories. But the identity of the partner had always been my father's closely guarded secret. He called it his strategic reserve. I unlocked the stall and walked to the mirror. I looked at myself, dark hair pulled back tight, eyes that looked too tired for 33. I applied a fresh layer of lipstick. All right, Dad, I whispered to the reflection. You want Mason? You've got him. I went back to the dinner. I ate my cake. I congratulated my brother. I kissed my father on the cheek, and I waited. The next morning, the sky over Harbor Glen was a bruised purple, threatening rain. I was in my kitchen, staring at a cup of black coffee. When my phone buzzed, it was Tessa Marlowe. Tessa and I had gone to law school together before I dropped out to help the family. She had stayed the course. Becoming one of the sharpest corporate attorneys in the state, she was also the only person in the world who knew exactly how much I hated the smell of my father's cigars. Tell me you are not watching the news, Tessa said. No, hello, no pleasantries. I am staring at a wall. Tess, I said, recovering from the knife in my back. The knife just got twisted, she said. I am hearing chatter, bad chatter. My contact at the merchant bank says there was a massive withdrawal initiated at 9 o'clock this morning. $5.1 million. I gripped the phone. $5.1 million. That is the entire silent partner fund. It is gone. Viv, Tessa said. The silent partner didn't just hesitate. They pulled the ripcord. Rumor is, They invoked an immediate exit clause. The wire transfer is already clearing. That is impossible, I said. Those agreements have notice periods. You cannot just walk away with $5 million overnight unless there is a breach, Tessa finished. A catastrophic breach of contract. Viv, people are saying the withdrawal happened less than 12 hours after your father's little speech. Do the math. The partner heard about Mason, I said. The realization made my stomach turn. They heard Mason was the heir, and they ran. Or they heard something else, Tessa said. But the timing is not a coincidence. You need to find out what is going on. If that liquidity is gone, your dad's company is operating on fumes. It is not my company anymore. Remember? I said, bitterness coating my tongue. It is Mason's legacy now. Vivian, Tessa said, her voice dropping to that serious, lawyerly tone I respected so much. If the company collapses, it does not just hurt Mason, it hurts the 400 people working in the plant. It hurts your pension. It hurts your name. Do not let them burn it down just to spite you. She was right. Damn her. She was right. I will call you back, I said. I hung up and grabbed my keys. I drove to my parents' house first. It was a sprawling colonial estate on the hill, overlooking the town. It looked peaceful, manicured, perfect. A lie made of brick and mortar. I found my father in his study. He was sitting behind his mahogany desk, staring at a tablet. He looked different than he had the night before. The vigor of the birthday toast was gone, replaced by a gray, pallid exhaustion. Vivian, he said, not looking up. I am busy. I know you are, I said. I walked in and closed the door behind me. I know about the money. Dad, his head snapped up. I do not know what you are talking about. $5.1 million, I said. Withdrawn this morning. Tessa Marlowe called me. The town is talking. Dad, the silent partner pulled out. Franklin slammed his hand on the desk. Tessa Marlowe should mind her own business. It is a temporary misunderstanding, just a leverage tactic. These investors, they try to squeeze you when they smell a transition. I have it under control. A leverage tactic. I stepped closer. Dad, they took the cash. That is not leverage. That is an eviction. Did they leave because of Mason? Do not make this about your brother, he warned. His voice shook slightly. This has nothing to do with the announcement. It is technical, administrative. Technical, I repeated. So, if I go down to the finance department right now, Darren Holt will tell me everything is fine. You will stay away from the office, Franklin said. He stood up, pointing a finger at me. You are not an employee. Vivian, you are family, yes, but you hold no position. If you go down there and stir things up, you will spook the creditors. Do you hear me? If you want to help, you will go home and let the men handle this. Let the men handle this. The phrase hung there, archaic and absurd. I am just going to pick up my personal files, I said, my voice icy. I left a box of things in my old office. Unless you want me to petition the board for access. He glared at me, his jaw working. Get your box, then go home. I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't give him the satisfaction. The drive to the company headquarters took 20 minutes. The Brooks Crown Manufacturing Building was a brick monolith from the 1950s, sturdy and imposing. I parked in the visitor lot a new indignity and walked into the lobby. The atmosphere inside was brittle. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Julie, jumped when she saw me. Miss Brooks, she squeaked. I didn't know you were coming in. Just grabbing some old files. Julie, I said, flashing a smile that felt like a mask. How is everything? Oh, fine. Great. Busy. She looked down at her phone. She was lying. I walked past the security turnstile and headed toward the executive wing. The hallway felt different. Usually. There was a hum of activity. Laughter. The sound of phones ringing. Today, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens before a storm hits. People were huddled in cubicles, whispering. When they saw me, They stopped abruptly and started typing furiously on blank screens. I passed the chief financial officer's office. Darren Holt was inside, his tie loosened, pacing back and forth while shouting into a headset. "I cannot authorize that release until the wire clears," he was yelling. "I don't care what the vendor says. Tell them to wait." He turned and saw me standing in the doorway. His face went slack. He immediately slammed his hand down on the phone base, ending the call. "Vivian," he said. He sounded breathless. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Darren," I said. "You look stressed." "End of quarter," he said quickly. Too quickly. He moved to the door and started to close it. "We are just reconciling some accounts. You know how it is." "I heard we lost a partner," I said softly. Darren froze. He looked left and right, checking the hallway. "Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" I asked. "Is it true?" "Vivian, please," he whispered. "I cannot talk to you. Your father. The instructions were clear. No information leaves this floor. If I talk to you, I lose my pension." He looked terrified, not annoyed, not corporate stressed, terrified. "I understand," I said. "I am just getting my things. Darren?" He nodded, relieved, and shut the door in my face. The click of the lock was loud in the silence. I went to the small office I used to occupy, now converted into a storage room. I noted with a pang of resentment and found my box of personal effects, a framed degree, a photo of me and Mom, a ceramic mug, meaningless artifacts of a wasted decade. I carried the box out to the parking lot. The air was heavy with the smell of rain on asphalt. I popped the trunk of my sedan and shoved the box inside. Heavy burden. I stiffened. I knew that voice. Mason was leaning against a sleek black sports car parked 2 spots over. He was wearing sunglasses. Even though the sky was dark gray, he looked like a caricature of a businessman. "Hello, Mason," I said, slamming the trunk. "I saw you leaving," he said, pushing himself off the car and sauntering over. "Dad told me you might stop by, checking up on the new management." "Just getting my things," I said. "Congratulations again on the promotion. It must be a lot of pressure." He laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Pressure, please. It is about vision. Viv, that is what Dad saw. He knows you are detail-oriented, a worker bee, but the company needs a leader, someone who can see the big picture." He stopped in front of me, invading my personal space just enough to be aggressive. He reached out and patted my shoulder. It took every ounce of my willpower not to recoil. "Honestly, Viv," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy, "you should be relieved. The weight of this place, the debt, the unions, the investors, it would have crushed you. You are too emotional. You take things too personally. Dad did you a favor." "Is that what you think?" I asked. "That I am relieved?" "I think you are jealous," he said, his smile turning cruel. "But you will get over it. We will cut you a nice dividend check at Christmas. You can go on a cruise. Find yourself a husband." He patted my shoulder again. "Go home, little sister. Leave the heavy lifting to us." He turned and walked away, whistling. I watched him go. I watched the way he walked, arrogant, sloppy, completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was already crumbling. Debt, unions, investors. He threw the words around like buzzwords. Having no idea that the investors had just walked out the door with $5.1 million, he wasn't a leader. He was a child playing dress-up in a burning house. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like clarity. My phone chimed. A new email notification. I glanced at the screen. It was from a sender I didn't recognize. Watcher88 at an encrypted domain. I opened it. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained a single sentence. "Ask your father why the silent partner was never silent." Attached was a PDF file. I hesitated, then tapped the file. It opened. It was a scanned document. heavily redacted in black ink. It looked like a contract. The header read, "Amended Participation Agreement." Most of the text was blacked out, but one paragraph near the bottom was circled in red. It was legalese, dense and dry, but the words jumped out at me. Termination of funding shall be immediate upon any public declaration of succession that violates the character clause. Silent partner retains the right to veto any familial appointment deemed financially or morally hazardous. I stared at the screen until the backlight dimmed. Morally hazardous. Someone had sent this to me. Someone who knew about the dinner. Someone who knew about the withdrawal. Someone who wanted me to know that this wasn't just a business deal gone wrong. My father hadn't just announced a successor. He had triggered a trap. The rain finally started to fall, heavy drops hitting the windshield like bullets. I looked up at the gray building, at the window of my father's office on the top floor. Mason thought I was emotional. Franklin thought I was a nuisance. They both thought I would fade into the background, grateful for my Christmas dividend. Silent and compliant, they were wrong. I started the engine. The windshield wipers swiped back and forth, clearing the view. I wasn't going to go home. I wasn't going to find a husband. I was going to find the truth. I put the car in reverse and backed out. I didn't know who the silent partner was. I didn't know who had sent the email. But I knew one thing for certain: my father was scared. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to help him hide it. I was going to dig until I hit the bottom, even if the whole estate came down with me. I sat in Tessa Marlowe's office, watching her read. Her office was a corner suite in a glass tower that overlooked the harbor, a world away from the brick and grease reality of Brooks Crown Manufacturing. Tessa was efficient, terrifyingly smart, and currently frowning so hard a line had appeared between her eyebrows. "This is not standard," Tessa said. Dropping the redacted document onto her mahogany desk, she took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Vivian, I review investment agreements for a living. I see venture capital, private equity, angel investors. This reads like a prenuptial agreement written by a paranoid Victorian patriarch." "The morality clause," I asked. "It is more than a morality clause," she corrected. "Look at the language here. Reputation harm. That is standard enough. But this family trigger events. And this one here, public succession declarations. Investors usually care about returns. EBITDA, market share. They do not micromanage which family member gives the birthday toast." She spun the paper around so I could see where she pointed. "Whoever wrote this wanted a kill switch," Tessa said. "They wanted the ability to pull their money out the second they felt uncomfortable with the family dynamic. And look at the date on the amendment." I leaned in. 14 months ago? Right. So this silent partner came in 5 years ago with the big money. But then, a little over a year ago, they forced your father to sign this amendment. Why? "Maybe they lost faith in him," I suggested. "Or they saw something they didn't like," Tessa said. "This clause about succession declarations is incredibly specific. It implies they were worried Franklin would do exactly what he did last night, hand the keys to the wrong person." "Mason," I said. The name tasted like ash. "Mason," she agreed. "If this document is real, your father's announcement triggered a default. That is why the $5.1 million disappeared this morning. It wasn't a tantrum, it was a contractual execution." I sat back, my mind racing. Dad told me it was just leverage tactics. He said he could fix it. "He is lying," Tessa said bluntly. "Once a withdrawal like this triggers, the capital is gone. The only way to get it back is to renegotiate from scratch. And right now, your family looks like a liability. Vivian, you need to know who this partner is. If they have this much power over your father, they own the company in all but name." "The email was anonymous," I said. "Watcher 88? Someone on the inside," Tessa mused. "Someone who wants you to blow this up. Be careful. Viv, if you start pulling threads, you might bring the whole ceiling down." "The ceiling is already falling." "Tess," I said, standing up. "I am just trying to see who is holding the hammer." I needed to talk to Darren Holt again. The brief interaction in his office doorway hadn't been enough. He was scared, and scared men made mistakes. I didn't go to his office this time. I knew he took his lunch at 1 o'clock, usually grabbing a sandwich from the deli down the street and eating it on a bench near the marina. It was a creature habit he had maintained for 20 years. I found him there, staring at the gray water, a half-eaten turkey sub in his lap. He jumped when I sat down next to him. "Jesus! Vivian!" he exclaimed, clutching his chest. "You cannot sneak up on people like that." "I am not sneaking. Darren, I am sitting." He started to wrap up his sandwich. "I have to get back. Busy afternoon." "Sit down," I said. It wasn't a request. He hesitated, then sank back onto the bench. He looked miserable. His skin had a gray, pasty quality, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "I cannot tell you anything," he said, staring at his shoes. "Your father was very specific. Confidentiality is paramount right now." "I know about the clause." "Darren," I said. He froze. "What clause?" "The succession clause." I lied smoothly, bluffing based on Tessa's analysis. The one that triggers a default if Dad appoints a successor without the partner's approval. I know that is why the money moved. Darren turned to look at me, and for a second, his guard completely collapsed. It wasn't annoyance I saw in his eyes. It was pure, unadulterated fear. He looked like a man who had just realized the lifeboat was leaking. You have seen the agreement," he whispered. "I know enough," I said. "I know the partner pulled the $5.1 million because of Mason. What I don't understand is why Dad would risk it. He knew the clause was there. Why announce Mason if he knew it would bankrupt us?" Darren looked around the park, checking for eavesdroppers. He leaned in close, his voice trembling. He didn't think they would actually do it. He thought he could bluff them. He thought if he made it public, made it a done deal, the partner wouldn't want to cause a scene. He underestimated her. Her, I caught the pronoun. The silent partner was a woman. "He underestimated her," I repeated softly. "And now we are insolvent." Darren flinched. Not insolvent yet, but cash flow is critical. We are moving things around, robbing Peter to pay Paul. But if the vendors find out, if the bank finds out our liquidity reserve is gone, it is over. "Vivian, chains on the doors." "Who is she?" "Darren?" I asked. "Who is the partner?" He pulled back, his eyes widening. I literally cannot. There are non-disclosure agreements that would ruin me. I have a mortgage. Vivian, I have kids in college." He stood up abruptly, clutching his sandwich wrapper like a shield. "Just tell your father to fix it," Darren stammered. "Tell him to undo the announcement. It is the only way." He hurried away, walking fast, almost running back toward the safety of his spreadsheets. I watched him go. Her. A woman with enough money to float a manufacturing empire and enough power to make my father shake. I drove to the county clerk's office. If I couldn't get answers from the people, I would get them from the paper. Public records were a beautiful thing. Most people assumed their secrets were safe because no one bothered to look. But I was bored, angry, and motivated. I pulled the property records for the Brooks estate, the house, the land, the manufacturing plant. For decades, everything had been held in a simple living trust controlled by Franklin and Elaine Brooks. I sat at the viewing terminal, scrolling through the digitized deeds. Everything looked normal until I hit an entry filed 3 months ago. Amendment to the Brooks Family Revocable Trust. I requested the document. The clerk, a woman chewing gum with rhythmic precision, printed it out for me for 50 cents a page. I took the stack to a quiet corner. The legal jargon was dense, but the structure was clear. My father had moved the core assets, the factory land, the patent portfolio, the primary residence into a subtrust, the Mason Brooks Beneficiary Trust. But it wasn't a standard inheritance transfer. The language was aggressive. It granted Mason immediate executive power of attorney over the assets in the event of incapacity or voluntary designation. Voluntary designation. That was the birthday dinner. But there was something else. A lien A lien had been filed against the subtrust on the same day it was created, a lien held by an entity called Vanguard Holdings, LLC. I searched for Vanguard Holdings. It was a shell company registered in Delaware. Dead end. But the timing was impossible to ignore. 3 months ago, my father had restructured the entire family fortune to give Mason control, and simultaneously, a mysterious LLC had taken a lien on those same assets. It looked like collateral. Was Dad borrowing against the company to give Mason a golden parachute, or was he paying off a debt? My phone buzzed. It was my father. "Meet me for lunch," he said. "The club? Now." The Harbor Glen Country Club was the kind of place where the iced tea cost $8, and the silence was enforced by social pressure. My father was waiting at a table by the window, overlooking the 18th hole. He looked better than he had in the study, but the grayness was still there, lurking under his tan. "You went to the office," he said as I sat down. No menu. He had already ordered for both of us Cobb salads. Dressing on the side. Control. Always control. "I picked up my box," I said, "and I ran into Darren." "Darren is a nervous wreck," Franklin said, waving a hand dismissively. "He panics if the coffee machine breaks. Do not listen to him." "He refers to the silent partner as her," I said. Franklin froze. He picked up his fork and stabbed a cherry tomato. "It is a figure of speech, like a ship. The company, her." "He said you underestimated her," I pressed. "He said you thought you could bluff." Franklin put the fork down. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine exhaustion in his eyes. "Vivian, why are you doing this? Why can you not just accept the decision? You are a smart girl. You have talents. You could go anywhere, do anything. I have spent 10 years keeping your company afloat." "Dad," I said, "I handled the EPA audit. I negotiated the union contract when you were too stubborn to sit in the room, and you replaced me with Mason. Mason, who thinks overhead is the roof." "Mason needs this," Franklin said. The words came out in a rush, low and urgent. I blinked. "He needs it? He is at a point in his life where he needs stability," Franklin said. He was staring out the window at a golfer lining up a putt. "He needs a win. Vivian, if he doesn't have this, I don't know what will happen to him." "So you gave him the company as therapy?" I asked, my voice rising. "You risked 500 jobs because Mason needs a confidence boost." "It is not that simple," Franklin snapped. People at the next table turned to look. He lowered his voice. "There are complications, debts, things Mason got involved in. If he is the CEO, if he controls the estate, he has protection, he has assets to leverage. It cleans the slate." "What kind of debts?" I asked. The dread was cold in my stomach. "It doesn't matter," Franklin said. "It is handled, but I need you to stop digging. If you scare the board, if you scare the vendors, the whole house of cards falls down, and then Mason has nothing. And if Mason has nothing," he trailed off. His hand, resting on the white tablecloth, was shaking, a fine, rhythmic tremor. He quickly pulled it into his lap. "Dad," I said softly, "are you okay?" "I am fine," he said, his voice brittle. "I am just tired of fighting my own family. Please, Vivian, for your mother's sake, let it go." He threw a $50 bill on the table and stood up. He walked away without looking back, leaving his salad untouched. I sat there, staring at the money. Mason needs this. My father wasn't promoting Mason because he believed in him. He was promoting him because he was trying to save him. I didn't go home. I went to see Leona Kipp. Leona had been the family's personal financial advisor for 20 years. She operated out of a small, discreet office in the financial district. She was a woman of few words and expensive suits. I didn't have an appointment, but Leona had a soft spot for me. She had always told me I had a head for numbers, which in her world was the highest compliment possible. "Vivian," she said, ushering me into her office. "I heard about the dinner. I am surprised." "You and everyone else," I said, taking a seat. I am not here to cry about it. Leona, I am here because I am worried about Dad. Franklin? She raised an eyebrow. He is a tank. He will outlive us all. He is shaking, I said, and he is making rash decisions, moving assets, changing trusts. Leona's face tightened. She looked down at her computer screen, tapping a key. Estate planning is complex. Vivian, as people age, they consolidate. He moved the properties into a trust for Mason, I said. And there is a lien from Vanguard Holdings. What is Vanguard? Leona. I cannot discuss client specifics, she said automatically. Is it a loan shark? I asked. Dad said Mason has debts. Is Vanguard covering Mason's mistakes? Leona sighed. She took off her glasses. It is not a loan shark. It is private placement, bridge financing. Bridge to what? To the succession, she said. Look, Vivian, your father has been accelerating disbursements for months. Liquidity has been moving very fast, unusually fast, like he is trying to plug leaks in a dam before it bursts. Vanguard provided capital to cover some shortfalls, secured against the real estate. It was risky, but he felt it was necessary. Shortfalls where? I asked. The company is profitable. I saw the Q3 reports. Leona looked at me, a strange expression on her face. Pity warning. Did you see the raw data, Vivian, or did you see the board presentation? The question hung in the air. I saw the presentation, I said slowly. Go look at the raw data, Leona said. She put her glasses back on. And Vivian, if you find what I think you will find, do not come back here. I cannot be involved. I still had my old company laptop. When I left the office earlier, I had grabbed it from the box. I sat in my living room, the laptop humming on the coffee table. It was an older model, heavy and slow, but it still had my credentials cached. I hadn't been an employee for 24 hours, but it was notoriously slow at purging access for family members. I logged in. The screen flickered to life. I connected to the VPN it held. I navigated to the shared drive. Most of the executive folders were locked, restricted to the C-suite, but I knew where the bodies were buried because I used to help bury them. There was a folder labeled old_archive_2024 that the finance team used as a dumping ground for draft reports. They rarely cleaned it out. I clicked through the subfolders until I found it. Forecast_models_V4_draft. I opened the spreadsheet. It was a mess of tabs and formulas. I scrolled to the cash flow projection. My heart stopped. The board presentation last month had shown a healthy 7% growth in revenue. This spreadsheet, the raw model, showed a 12% decline. I toggled between the tabs. Sales_actual versus sales_projected. The numbers didn't match, not even close. Someone had manually overridden the actual sales figures, inflating them by nearly 20%. They were booking orders that didn't exist. They were counting inventory as sold when it was likely still sitting in the warehouse. And the cash position, it was negative, deeply negative. The company was bleeding money. The shortfalls Leona mentioned weren't small leaks. They were arterial wounds. And my father knew. He had to know. He was the one moving the money. He was using the silent partner's capital and this mysterious Vanguard loan to cover the operating losses, hiding the rot under a layer of fresh debt. And now, he had handed the whole burning wreckage to Mason. Mason didn't know. I was sure of it. Mason thought he was inheriting an empire. He was inheriting a bomb. My phone rang. It was Mason. Hey, Viv, he said. His voice was different, softer, less manic than in the parking lot. Look, I felt bad about earlier. Adrenaline. You know I shouldn't have said that about you being crushed. It is fine, Mason, I said, staring at the spreadsheet that proved our inheritance was a lie. Let's get coffee, he said. Just the two of us. Peace offering. There's a place on 4th Street that is still open. I hesitated. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him he was a fool. But I needed to know how much he knew. Okay, I said. 20 minutes. The coffee shop was quiet, the evening crowd thinning out. Mason was waiting at a corner table with 2 lattes. He looked tired. The arrogance from the morning had faded, replaced by a nervous energy. "Mom is worried about you," he said as I sat down. "She says you are not answering her texts." "I am busy, Mason." "Busy doing what?" He tried to make it sound casual, but his eyes were sharp. "Dad said you were asking questions about the partner, the silent one. The one who just left with $5 million. I took a sip of latte. "Yes, I am asking questions. Someone has to." "It is handled," Mason said. "Dad explained it to me. It is just a contract dispute. We are going to find a new partner. Better terms. We don't need them." "Do you know who they were?" I asked. "Some investment group. Faceless suits. Who cares?" He didn't know. He truly didn't know it was a specific woman. "So, what have you found out?" Mason asked, leaning in. "You know, with your digging, anything interesting." "Why?" I looked at him. "Are you worried I will find something?" No. Of course not. I want to make sure we are on the same page. Dad says you are misinterpreting things, that you're emotional about the toast. Did you misread it?" "Viv, do you think there is some conspiracy just because you didn't get the job?" "I think the company is in trouble, Mason," I said quietly. "Real trouble. I think the numbers are fake." Mason laughed. It was a loud, forced sound. "Fake you sound crazy. We just had the best quarter in 5 years. I saw the charts." "You saw the charts Dad gave you," I said. "And I trust him," Mason snapped. The softness vanished. "That is your problem, Vivian. You never trusted him. You always thought you were smarter. That is why he picked me. Loyalty. I am loyal to this family." "Loyalty isn't enough to pay the payroll tax," I said. "We are done here," Mason said. He stood up. "Stop digging. Vivian, serious. You are going to embarrass yourself." He stormed out. I watched him go. He was terrified, too, but he was terrified of losing the fantasy. I was terrified of the reality. I went home. My apartment was dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the couch, the laptop glowing in front of me, the spreadsheet of lies staring back. My phone chimed. Another anonymous message. I picked it up. It wasn't an email this time. It was a text message from a blocked number. Attached was an audio file. I pressed play. The voice was distorted, deepened digitally until it sounded like a machine grinding gears. "If you look at the vendor payments, you will find where the partner's money really went. It didn't go to the factory. It went to the services." The message ended. Vendor payments. I turned back to the laptop. I opened the accounts_payable file. It was a massive list of thousands of transactions. Materials, shipping, utilities, insurance. I filtered by amount. I looked for large, recurring payments, steel suppliers, legitimate, logistics firms, legitimate, power company, legitimate. Then I saw it. North Pine Strategies, $30,000 a month. Every month for the last 14 months. I checked the category code. Consulting services. I searched for North Pine Strategies in the vendor master file. No address. Just a P.O. box in a strip mall on the edge of town. No tax ID listed in the main view. I opened a new browser tab and searched for North Pine Strategies. The website appeared. It was a single page. A stock photo of a handshake. A vague mission statement about optimizing corporate synergy. No team page. No phone number. Just an email form. It was a ghost ship. I went back to the spreadsheet. $30,000 a month was $360,000 a year. It wasn't a fortune, but it was significant. And it had started 14 months ago, the exact same time the silent partner had forced the amendment. The exact same time the character clause was added. The partner had seen this. The partner had seen money leaking out to a fake consulting firm. I scrolled down. There were other payments. Smaller, irregular ones. North Pine Special Projects, North Pine Retainer. In total, over $500,000 had flowed to this shell company in the last year. This wasn't just hiding losses. This was theft. Someone was siphoning money out of the company, disguising it as consulting fees. Was it Dad? Was he stealing from his own company to pay off Mason's debts? Or was it Mason? Mason pushes for North Pine, I whispered to myself, imagining the conversation. Turnaround consultants. I remembered what Franklin had said at lunch. Mason needs this. Debts. The silent partner didn't leave because of a toast. She left because she realized the Brooks family wasn't just incompetent. We were thieves. I closed the laptop. The room felt very cold. I knew what I had to do. I had to find North Pine. I had to see who picked up the mail at that P.O. box. The withdrawal of the $5 million wasn't a tantrum. It was an escape. The silent partner had pulled the chute before the plane crashed, and I was the only one left in the cockpit who knew how to read the altimeter. I grabbed my coat. Sleep could wait. The truth was waiting in a strip mall on the edge of town. The address for North Pine Strategies was located on the far east side of Harbor Glen, a district where the manicured lawns of the executives faded into cracked asphalt and warehouses with corrugated metal roofs. I parked my car between a faded yellow dumpster and a sedan with a taped-up window. The GPS on my phone insisted I had arrived, but there was no glass tower, no brass plaque, no valet stand. There was only a strip mall that had seen better decades. A laundromat spun rhythmically on the left. A discount liquor store with bars on the windows sat on the right. Sandwiched between them was a storefront with a generic sign, pack and ship. Mailbox rentals, Notary Public. I checked the vendor invoice on my phone again. North Pine Strategies. Suite 404. I walked inside. The air smelled of cardboard dust and stale coffee. A young man with a nose ring and a band t-shirt was leaning over the counter, scrolling through a tablet. Behind him was a wall of small, brass-keyed mailboxes. Hundreds of them. "Can I help you?" he asked, not looking up. "I am looking for Suite 404. I said. "North Pine Strategies." He finally looked at me. His eyes flicked from my expensive raincoat to my face, and his posture stiffened. He put the tablet down. "We don't have suites," he said flatly. "Just boxes." "The invoice lists it as a suite," I said. "I am looking for the office. The consultants." "Lady, look around," he said, gesturing to the wall of metal squares. "Does this look like a consulting firm? Box 404 is right there." He pointed to a small box near the floor. It was stuffed full. The edge of a white envelope was sticking out through the slit. "I need to speak to the owner of that box," I said. "It is urgent legal business regarding Brooks Crown Manufacturing." The clerk laughed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound. "Yeah, well, unless you have a warrant, I don't care. We don't give out customer info. Store policy. Privacy is the only thing we sell here that is worth a damn." "They are stealing from my family," I said. The words came out before I could check them. The clerk's smirk faded slightly, but he shook his head. "Look, I just work here. The guy comes in once a week, empties it out, and leaves. That is all I know. He wears a hat. He doesn't chat. Now buy some stamps or get out." I stared at box 404. $30,000 a month was being mailed to a metal box next to a laundromat. It wasn't a business. It was a black hole. I turned and walked out, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully behind me. I drove straight to Tessa's office. I didn't call first. When I arrived, her assistant tried to wave me off, but Tessa saw my face through the glass wall of her office and buzzed me in immediately. "You look like you are ready to hit someone," Tessa said as I threw my purse onto her sofa. "North Pine Strategies is a mailbox," I said. "In a strip mall next to a liquor store." Tessa sighed and spun her chair around to her computer. "Of course it is. Did you get a name?" The clerk stonewalled me. "Privacy policy." "Right. Well, that is why you have me." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "I can pull the business registration filings. It is public record. Vivian, if they are incorporated in the state, they have to list a registered agent." We waited in silence for the database to load. The hum of the building's HVAC system filled the room. "Here we go," Tessa said. "North Pine Strategies, LLC, Filed 14 months ago. 14 months, I repeated. The same month the silent partner forced the amendment, the same month the character clause was signed. Registered agent, Tessa read. Sentinel Corporate Services, Delaware. What does that mean? It means it is a nesting doll, Tessa said, turning the screen toward me. Sentinel is a service that exists solely to hide the names of the real owners. You pay them a fee, they put their name on the form, and they forward the legal notices to you. It is a shell. Vivian, a classic. Textbook shell company designed to invoice for services that don't exist and move money into the dark. Who signed the incorporation papers? I asked. An authorized representative of Sentinel, Tessa said. But look at the address for the statements. It is not the mailbox. It is a P.O. box in the city. And look at the initial filing fee payment method. She clicked a link. A scanned check appeared. It is drawn on a personal account, Tessa said. But the signature is illegible, just a scribble. I leaned in, squinting at the screen. The signature was a mess of loops, but the bank logo in the corner was distinct. Harbor Glen Community Trust. That is a local bank, I said. Small, old school. Vivian, Tessa said, her voice dropping. This isn't just theft. This is embezzlement. Whoever set this up knew how to navigate the company's vendor approval process. They knew exactly how to fly under the radar. Keep the invoices just below the threshold that requires board approval. 30,000, I said. The board only reviews contracts over 50,000. Exactly, Tessa said. Someone on the inside built a pipe to drain the company dry, and they started doing it over a year ago. I stood up. I need to talk to Darren. Vivian, wait, Tessa warned. If you go in there swinging, I am not swinging. Tess, I said, grabbing my purse, I am holding a smoking gun, and I'm going to make him look at it. I waited for Darren Holt in the parking garage this time. I knew his car, a beige sedan that was always washed, always sensible. I leaned against the concrete pillar next to it, the printout of the North Pine registration in my hand. It was 6 o'clock. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the concrete. Darren appeared 10 minutes later, walking with his head down, carrying a briefcase that looked too heavy for him. He unlocked his car, threw the briefcase in the back, and turned to open the driver's door. Hello? Darren? I said. He jumped so hard he dropped his keys. They clattered on the concrete, echoing in the empty garage. Vivian, he gasped. Are you trying to give me a heart attack? I went to the strip mall. Darren, I said. I didn't move to help him pick up the keys. I saw the mailbox. I know North Pine is a ghost. Darren went pale. He looked around the garage, his eyes darting to the security cameras. I don't know what you are talking about, he whispered. 14 months ago, I said, stepping closer. North Pine starts billing us. $30,000 a month, consulting fees for a company that doesn't exist. You signed the checks. Darren, I saw your digital signature on the approval logs. It was authorized, he hissed. It was all authorized. By who? I demanded. Who authorized you to pay a shell company $500,000 while the factory is bleeding cash? Darren slumped against his car. He looked defeated. Mason. The name hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. Mason brought them in, Darren said, his voice shaking. He said they were turnaround consultants. He said they were going to streamline operations. I told him I needed to see a contract, a scope of work. He told me to just process the damn invoices. And you just did it, I asked. You are the CFO, Darren. You have a fiduciary duty. I went to your father, Darren cried. I went to Franklin the first month. I told him this looked irregular. I told him the company had no digital footprint. And what did Dad say? Darren looked down at his keys on the floor. He said to pay it. He said Mason was trying to take initiative. He said we needed to let Mason have a win. He signed the override approval himself. I felt the air leave my lungs. Dad approved it. He thought it was real, Darren said. Or maybe he just wanted it to be real. Mason spun this whole story about high-level strategy. Franklin didn't want to undermine him, so we paid. And we kept paying, and no consultants ever showed up. And the silent partner, I asked. Did she know? She audits the books, Darren said. She has full access rights. She saw the payments. That is why the amendment happened. She saw the money going out to a ghost, and she put a leash on your father's neck. She told him if he made one wrong move, one move that threatened the company's reputation, she would pull the plug. And then he announced Mason, I whispered. Exactly, Darren said. He handed the company to the guy who hired the ghost, and she pulled the plug. I looked at Darren. He was a weak man, a yes man, but he wasn't the criminal. He was just the getaway driver who didn't know he was robbing a bank. Go home, Darren, I said. He scrambled to pick up his keys and got into his car. He peeled out of the spot, his tires screeching, leaving me alone in the exhaust fumes. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. Dinner, I made your favorite roast. I stared at the screen. I didn't want to go. I wanted to go home, lock my door, and scream. But I needed to see her. I needed to see if she was part of the lie, or just another victim of it. The family house was warm and smelled of rosemary and garlic. My mother, Elaine, met me at the door with a glass of red wine already poured. She was wearing a silk blouse and pearls, her hair perfectly coiffed. She looked like the cover of a magazine about gracious living, but her hand was trembling as she handed me the glass. I am so glad you came, she said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. Your father is resting. He has had a headache all day. Just the two of us tonight. We sat in the sunroom. Elaine talked about the garden club, about the weather, about a new drapery fabric she was considering. She was filling the silence with noise, terrified of what might fill it if she stopped, every 2 minutes. She glanced at her phone sitting on the coffee table. When it buzzed, she flinched. Mom, I said, cutting off a story about hydrangeas. What is wrong? Nothing, she said, smiling a tight, brittle smile. I am just worried about your father, the stress of the succession. It is not just the succession, I said. The silent partner pulled out. The company is in trouble. Oh, Vivian, don't be dramatic, she said, waving her hand. Business has ups and downs. Franklin always handles it. He is a genius with these things. Franklin approved payments to a fake company Mason set up, I said. Elaine froze. The wineglass in her hand tilted dangerously. Mason wouldn't do that, she said. Her voice was flat. He has big ideas. Sometimes they are expensive. Mom, I said, leaning forward. North Pine Strategies. Do you know that name? She looked away. She looked at the dark window. I don't know the details of the business. Vivian, you know that. I checked the public records, I said. Mason has debts, Dad told me. He said Mason needs the estate to cover his mistakes. Mom, how bad is it? Elaine put her glass down. She covered her face with her hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. He got involved with some people, she whispered. Investment groups, mentors. He wanted to prove he could make money on his own. Without your father's help, he borrowed money, a lot of money. And he lost it. She nodded. It evaporated, bad deals, crypto, things I don't understand. But the people he borrowed from, they were not banks. Vivian, they were calling the house. They were sending letters. So you helped him, I said. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. He is my son. He was drowning. I co-signed a few loans, just to bridge the gap, just until the company dividend came in. How much, Mom? I don't know the total, she sobbed. I just signed where he told me to. He said it was temporary. He said once he took over the company, he could restructure everything. You co-signed personal loans, I said, the horror rising in my throat. Mom, did you use the house as collateral? She didn't answer. She just wept. I looked around the room. The the silk drapes, the antique furniture, the life they had built for 40 years. It was all leveraged. If Mason failed, and he was destined to fail, the creditors wouldn't just take the company. They would take this house. They would take everything. "Does Dad know?" I asked. "He knows about some of it," she said. "That is why he pushed the succession. He thought if Mason had the title, the creditors would back off. He thought it would buy us time. It was a tragedy of errors. My mother enabling the son out of love, my father enabling the son out of pride, and both of them willing to burn down the entire village just to keep the prince warm." The next night was the Harbor Glen Charity Gala. It was the biggest social event of the season, a black tie affair held at the Waterfront Convention Center. Tickets cost $1,000 a plate. Normally, I would have skipped it, but the company had bought a table months ago, and my absence would be noted. More importantly, I had a feeling if the silent partner was a woman of influence, a friend of the company, she would be there. I wore a dark navy gown, severe and simple. I wasn't there to sparkle. I was there to hunt. The ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and sequins. I navigated the crowd, nodding to people I knew, dodging questions about the succession. I found my way to the bar and ordered a sparkling water. "You look like you are analyzing the structural integrity of the chandeliers," a voice said beside me. I turned. Standing there was a woman I had never formally met, but whose presence demanded attention. She was in her late 60s, perhaps 70. She wore a silver gown that looked like liquid mercury and a necklace of sapphires that probably cost more than my apartment. Her hair was white, cut into a sharp, chic bob. Her eyes were piercingly blue and terrifyingly intelligent. "They are a bit gaudy for my taste," I replied. "Agreed," she said. "But charity requires a certain amount of theater, doesn't it?" She extended a hand. Her grip was firm, cool. "Maris Vane," she said. My breath hitched. "Maris." "Vivian Brooks," I said. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. It wasn't the polite recognition of a stranger. It was deep, specific. She looked at me like she had been studying me for years. "I know," she said. "I am a friend of the company. I have known your father for a long time." "I haven't seen you at company events before," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I prefer to stay in the background," Maris said. "Silence is often more profitable than noise, don't you think?" She took a sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving mine. "I heard about the announcement. Your brother, a bold choice." "It was my father's choice," I said. "Yes," she said. "Franklin always did have a flair for the dramatic, even when the script calls for subtlety." She leaned in slightly. "You used to work at the legal aid clinic, didn't you?" "Down on 4th Street. I blinked, surprised. "Years ago, before I joined the company. How did you know that—" "I have a good memory," she said enigmatically. "You were very good, diligent. You fought for a woman who was being evicted by a predatory landlord. You found a loophole in the lease that saved her home." "I remember that case," I said. "Mrs. Higgins?" "You saved her life," Maris said. "Most people in your position would have just written a check and walked away. You did the work." "It was the right thing to do," I said. "It is rare," Maris said. "Character is rare." She looked over my shoulder. Her expression hardened. "If you will excuse me, Vivian, I see someone I need to educate." She walked away, moving through the crowd like a shark parting a school of fish. I turned and followed her gaze. She was heading toward a quiet hallway near the restrooms. Standing there, looking anxious, was my father. I waited a moment, then followed. I kept my distance, staying in the shadow of a large potted palm near the entrance to the hallway. The music from the ballroom was muffled here. Their voices were low but intense. "You promised," Maris was saying. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a cutting edge. "You promised you would handle the succession properly. You promised vetting. You promised stability." "I had to do it, Maris," Franklin said. He sounded pleading. "Mason is ready. He has changed." "He has not changed," Maris snapped. "He is a liability, and you announced it publicly. You forced my hand. Franklin, you violated the agreement. I can fix it," Franklin said. "Just give me time. Put the money back. If the vendors see the gap—" "You didn't listen," Maris said. "You thought you could manipulate me like you manipulate your board. You didn't read the clause. Reputation harm. Naming a gambler and a fraud as your CEO damages my reputation. Now you will face the consequences." "Please," Franklin said. "Maris, for old time's sake." "The old times are dead. Franklin," she said. "You killed them when you lied to me." She turned and walked away, heading toward the exit. Franklin stood there, slumped against the wall, looking like a man whose soul had just been evicted. I stepped out of the shadows. "Dad?" I said. Franklin jumped. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wet. He didn't try to lie. He didn't have the energy left. "You heard," he whispered. "Maris Vane," I said. "She is the partner." He nodded. "Yes. You told me she was just a financier," I said. "You said she was just leverage." "She is a shark," Franklin said, pushing himself off the wall. "She came in when we needed capital to expand. She offered terms no bank would match. But she wanted control. She wanted oversight." "Because she knew you were hiding things," I said. "She knew about North Pine. She knew about the bleeding." "She is cruel, Vivian," Franklin said, gripping my arm. "She doesn't care about family. She only cares about her standards. She is going to destroy us because I didn't follow her rules perfectly." "She is going to destroy us because you lied to her," I said, pulling my arm away. "And because you put a thief in charge of her investment." "Mason is not a thief," Franklin shouted, his voice cracking. "He made mistakes, I was fixing it." "By stealing more?" I asked. "By letting Mom sign away the house." Franklin's face went gray. "You know about the house." "I know everything, Dad," I said. "I know about North Pine. I know about the amendment. I know about the loans." He looked at me, and I saw the crumble. The great Franklin Brooks, the titan of industry, was just a frightened old man trying to cover up his son's mess with other people's money. "What do I do?" he whispered. "Vivian, what do I do?" "You go home," I said. "You go home and you tell Mom the truth, all of it." "And the company?" he asked. "I will handle the company," I said. I found Tessa in the lobby, waiting for her valet. I pulled her aside. "It is Maris Vane," I said. "The partner is Maris Vane." Tessa's eyes widened. "The philanthropist, the real estate mogul, the very one. Vivian, she is formidable. She doesn't just invest, she colonizes. She has a hybrid deal," I said. "Funding plus veto rights." Dad confirmed it. "The estate announcement violated her ethics and reputation standards. That is why she pulled the cash." "So the money is gone for good," Tessa said. Unless we can prove the violation has been cured," I said. "How do you cure a public announcement of a new CEO?" Tessa asked. "You remove the CEO," I said. "Vivian, your father just appointed him. He isn't going to fire him 3 days later. It would be an admission of total failure." "I don't need Dad to fire him," I said. "I need Maris to know that I am the one who found the rot. I need her to know that there is one person in this family who isn't a liar." "You are going to meet her," Tessa realized. "Vivian, be careful. If you go to her, you are circumventing the board and your father. That is corporate treason. If you fail, they will blacklist you from the industry." "If I don't go," I said, looking out at the rain-slicked street, "there won't be an industry left to be blacklisted from." I remembered Maris's words. Character is rare. She had baited me. She had come to the gala to see me, to see if I was my father's daughter, or if I was the woman who saved Mrs. Higgins. She was waiting for me to make a move. "Find me her home address," I said to Tessa. "It is late, Viv," Tessa warned. "The check cleared this morning. Tess, we are on borrowed time. I am going to see her tomorrow. I looked at the text message from the anonymous sender, the audio file. The North Pine tip. Ask your father why the silent partner was never silent. I had asked, and now I knew. She wasn't silent because she was the only one paying attention, and now I was going to make sure she heard me. I called Maris Vane's office at 9 o'clock in the morning. I expected a gatekeeper, a receptionist trained to politely deflect the desperate daughters of failing business partners. Instead, the line clicked over after 2 rings, and a woman with a crisp, efficient voice simply said, "Ms. Vane is expecting you, Ms. Brooks. She's at the lakeside property today. She said you would know the way." I didn't know the way, but a quick search of the county tax records. My new favorite pastime pointed me toward a secluded address on the north shore of Lake Eleanor. It was a 40-minute drive from Harbor Glen, winding through dense pine forests that smelled of damp earth and money. The property was not ostentatious. There were no gilded gates or marble fountains. It was a modern structure of glass and dark wood, cantilevered over the water like a bird poised for flight. It was beautiful, severe, and intimidating. I parked my car on the crushed gravel driveway. A man in a dark suit waited by the front door. He didn't ask for my ID. He simply opened the door and gestured down a long gallery-like hallway. "She is on the terrace," he said. I walked through the house. The walls were lined with abstract art slashes of red and black that looked like violent interruptions on a calm canvas. I stepped out onto the terrace. The air was colder here, coming off the water. Maris Vane was sitting in a low Adirondack chair, wrapped in a cashmere shawl. She was watching a pair of loons drift across the glassy surface of the lake. There was a steaming pot of tea on the table beside her, with 2 cups. "You made good time," she said without turning around. "You knew I would come," I said, walking to the railing. "I counted on it," she replied. She gestured to the empty chair. "Sit down. Vivian, the tea is lapsang souchong. It smells like smoke, but it tastes like clarity." I sat. I didn't pour the tea. "You withdrew the money," I said. $5.1 million. You gutted the company in a single morning." Maris turned to look at me. Her eyes were that piercing, unsettling blue I had seen at the gala. I exercised a contractual right. "There is a difference. You did it to punish my father," I said, "because he didn't listen to you, because he announced Mason. I do not punish people." "Vivian," she said calmly, pouring tea into her own cup. "Punishment implies emotion. This is business. Your father and I had an agreement, a very specific set of boundaries. No secret debt, no deceptive reporting, and absolutely no manufactured narratives." "Manufactured narratives." "The story he told at the dinner," Maris said. "The heroic heir, the stable succession. It was a lie. Mason is not a leader. He is a liability. Your father tried to rewrite reality to suit his ego, and he expected me to finance the fiction. I don't invest in fiction. Vivian, I invest in facts." "So you burned down the factory to prove a point?" I asked, my voice rising. "There are 400 families relying on those paychecks. Maris?" "And if I had stayed," she countered sharply. "If I had left my money in enabling Mason's incompetence and your father's delusion, how long until the factory burned down anyway? 6 months, a year. And then the bankruptcy would be total. By pulling out now, I forced the crisis. I forced the truth to the surface. I forced you to come here." "Why me?" I asked. "Why not summon the board? Why not sue?" Maris smiled. It was a small ghost of a smile. "Do you remember the legal clinic on 4th Street 10 years ago?" I blinked, thrown off balance. Yes, I volunteered there during my first year of law school, before I dropped out." "There was a woman," Maris said. "Elena Ramirez. She was being evicted from her apartment because the landlord claimed she had violated noise ordinances. It was a fabrication. He wanted to renovate and triple the rent." "I remember," I said slowly. "She had 3 kids. The landlord was a bully." "Elena was my housekeeper," Maris said. "She had been with me for 20 years. She didn't want to ask me for help. She was proud. So she went to the clinic. I went with her, wearing a raincoat and a hat, sitting in the back of the room. I watched a 23-year-old girl tear that landlord's lawyer to shreds. You didn't care that he was from a big firm. You didn't care that it was pro bono. You cared about the truth. I stared at her. I had a vague memory of a quiet woman in the corner, but I had been so focused on the case I hadn't paid attention. You helped me, Maris said. You protected someone I cared about when you had nothing to gain from it. That stuck with me. Character is not what you do when the cameras are on. Vivian, it is what you do in a dingy clinic office on a Tuesday afternoon. She took a sip of her tea. That is why I partnered with your father, she revealed. He came to me 5 years ago. He was desperate for capital to modernize the plant. He gave me the pitch, ROI, market share, legacy. But I agreed because I knew you were in the operational leadership. I thought, the father is a peacock, but the daughter is the spine. I bet on you. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I had spent years thinking I was invisible, that my work went unnoticed, and all this time, the silent partner had been banking on me. And then he fired me, I whispered. He replaced you, Maris corrected. And in doing so, he violated the core tenet of our arrangement. He promised me a legacy partnership. He promised that the Brooks estate would transition to competent, ethical hands. When he named Mason, he broke the promise. She reached into a leather folder on the table and pulled out a document. She slid it across the glass table toward me. Read the highlighted section, she commanded. I looked at the paper. It was a copy of the trust amendment, the same one I had seen at the county clerk's office. But this was the full, unredacted version held by the investor. Transfer of executive control shall be expedited in the event of incapacity or diagnosis of a terminal condition affecting cognitive or physical function. Incapacity, I read. Diagnosis. Your father didn't just announce Mason because he was stubborn, Maris said softly. He filed this amendment 3 months ago, the same week he started visiting a specialist in Boston. I looked up at her. The wind off the lake suddenly felt freezing. What do you know? I asked. I know that men like Franklin Brooks do not give up power unless they are forced to. Maris said, he is terrified. Vivian, he isn't trying to build a dynasty for Mason. He is trying to secure a lifeboat before he is too sick to captain the ship. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady. I have to go. One more thing, Maris said. She remained seated, her gaze unyielding. The money I withdrew. It is sitting in an escrow account. It is not gone. It is waiting. Waiting for what? For a reason to come back, she said. But I will not partner with liars. If you want to save this company, you have to decide what matters more to you, the Brooks family name, or the truth, because right now, they are mutually exclusive. I drove back to Harbor Glen in a daze. The trees blurred into a wall of green and brown. Diagnosis, incapacity. I thought about the shaking hands, the gray skin, the sudden, frantic urgency to settle the estate, the way he had snapped at me at lunch, saying Mason needs this. He wasn't protecting Mason. He was protecting us. In his twisted, patriarchal mind, he thought that by installing a male heir, any male heir, he was ensuring the family's survival after he was gone. He thought he was dying, and he believed the only way to save us was to follow the old script. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house. It was midday, but the curtains were drawn. The house looked like it was sleeping, or mourning. I used my key to enter. The foyer was silent. Mom, I called out. I found Elaine in the kitchen. She was polishing silver. It was a nervous habit she had developed years ago whenever things felt out of control. She would scrub the tarnish off the forks and spoons until they gleamed. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes were red. Vivian, she said, I didn't expect you. Put the spoon down. Mom, I said gently. She dropped the spoon. It clattered onto the table. Maris Vane told me about the amendment, I said. The incapacity clause, the specialist in Boston. Elaine let out a small, strangled sound. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "He didn't want you to know," she sobbed. "He didn't want anyone to know." "What is it?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "Tell me." "Congestive heart failure," she whispered. "Stage 3. The doctors said his heart is functioning at 30%. They told him he needs to reduce stress immediately. They told him if he keeps running the company at this pace, he will be dead in 6 months." I closed my eyes. The anger I had been carrying the hot. Righteous fury cooled into a heavy, aching sadness. "So he picked Mason," I said. "He thought—" Elaine took a shuddering breath. "He thought if he handed it over, he could rest. He thought Mason would step up. He wanted to believe it so badly. Vivian, he convinced himself that Mason was ready because he needed Mason to be ready. And the loans?" I asked. "The money you signed for?" "He doesn't know the extent of it," she admitted. "He knows Mason has debts, but he doesn't know I leveraged the house. I thought if Mason became CEO, the salary and the dividends would pay it all off before your father found out. I was trying to buy peace. Vivian, I just wanted everyone to be safe." I looked at my mother. She was a woman who had spent 40 years smoothing over the rough edges of her husband's life, and now she was trying to smooth over the edges of a cliff. "Mom," I said, taking her hands. They were cold. "Mason isn't stepping up. He is stealing. He set up a fake consulting firm called North Pine Strategies. He has been siphoning money out of the company for over a year." Elaine pulled her hands away, shaking her head violently. No, he wouldn't. He makes mistakes, but he isn't a criminal." "He is," I said firmly. "And Dad approved the payments because he was too sick and too desperate to look closely. They are destroying the company. Mom, Dad is dying to save a legacy that Mason is currently looting." "What do we do?" she asked, her voice small and terrified. "If the board finds out, if the bank finds out—" "The bank already suspects," I said, "and the silent partner definitely knows. That is why she left." I stood up. "I need to go. Mom, I have to find the proof. Real proof, not just invoices." "Vivian," she called out as I turned to leave. "Please, don't hurt him. Your father. He can't take the shame. It will kill him faster than the heart failure." I paused in the doorway. The truth hurts, Mom, but lies are fatal. I needed Rory Baines. Rory was a mid-level accountant at Brooks Crown. He was young, ambitious, and notably terrible at lying. I had caught him once trying to expense a personal dinner as a client meeting, and instead of firing him, I had given him a lecture on ethics and a second chance. He owed me. I texted him, "Meet me at the Riverwalk, 30 minutes. Come alone." He was waiting on a bench near the water, looking like he was expecting a firing squad. He was wearing his company ID badge, twisting the lanyard around his finger until the skin turned white. "Miss Brooks," he said, jumping up as I approached. I shouldn't be here. Darren sent a memo. No contact with non-employees." "Sit down, Rory," I said. "I am not here to get you in trouble. I am here to save your license." He sat. He looked like he was about to be sick. "I know about North Pine," I said. "I know about the cash crunch. What I don't know is how you are balancing the books for the bank. You are showing a profit. Rory, how—" He looked at the river. A barge was moving slowly downstream, heavy with coal. "I didn't want to do it," he whispered. "Darren made me. He said it was just a timing difference, that we would catch up next quarter. What did you do?" "Reclassification," he said. "We are taking current operating losses, raw material costs, utility bills, the North Pine payments, and reclassifying them as deferred vendor obligations. We are moving them off the PL and sticking them onto the balance sheet as long-term liabilities. It makes the monthly net income look positive, but the debt is piling up in the background." "You are capitalizing expenses," I said. "That is accounting fraud 101, Rory. That is Enron's stuff." "I know," he hissed, tears welling in his eyes. But Mason needed the numbers to look good for the succession announcement. He said if the profits dipped, the board wouldn't approve the transfer. He promised it was just for 1 month, but then it was 2, then 3. We are carrying $3 million of hidden expenses. Miss Brooks, if the auditors look at the GL codes, we are all going to jail. Does Dad know? I asked. Does Franklin? Rory shook his head. I don't think so. He just sees the summary dashboard. Mason and Darren control the inputs. Your father asks, are we profitable? And they show him a chart that says yes. He doesn't dig anymore. He seems checked out. He is sick, I said. Rory looked down. I just do the data entry. Miss Brooks, I have a student loan. I can't lose this job. If this collapses, Rory, you won't just lose your job, I said. You will be unhireable. You need to give me the logs. The audit trail showing who ordered the changes. I can't, he said. They track downloads. Print them, I said. Take screenshots. Whatever you have to do, get me the evidence that Mason ordered the reclassification. Do it, and I will make sure the board knows you cooperated. I will protect you. He looked at me, searching for the authority I used to hold. Can you really protect me? You're not even in the building anymore. I am the only one who can save the building. Rory, I said. Everyone else is trying to burn it down. He nodded slowly. Tonight, I will leave a flash drive in your mailbox. But then I am out. I am calling in sick until this blows over. Deal, I said. I walked along the river for a long time after Rory left. The sun began to set, casting long purple shadows across the water. I had the pieces now, all of them. I had the motive, Franklin's illness and his desperate need to settle the estate. I had the crime, Mason's embezzlement through North Pine, and the fraudulent accounting to cover it up. I had the leverage, Maris Vane's conditional offer to return. And I had a choice. Maris had made it clear. Decide what matters more to you, the Brooks family name or the truth. If I expose this, I would destroy my father's reputation, the man who prided himself on integrity, on being a pillar of the community, would be revealed as a dupe who let his son rob the company blind. The shock might actually kill him. My mother would lose the house. Mason would go to prison. The Brooks family would be a synonym for scandal. But if I stayed silent, if I walked away, took my dividend check, and let Mason run the show, the company would collapse within 6 months. The vendors would stop shipping steel. The workers, men and women I had known since I was a child. People like Julie at the front desk and the guys on the assembly line would lose their pensions. They would be standing in unemployment lines because I was too cowardly to hurt my father's feelings. I sat on a park bench and watched the lights of the city flicker on. I remembered the dinner toast. Mason deserves the entire estate. My father had said it with such conviction. He had looked right through me, erasing 10 years of my work, my loyalty, my sacrifice. He had chosen the fantasy of a son over the reality of a daughter, and even now, knowing what Mason was, Elaine was begging me to protect the lie. Don't hurt him. It will kill him. They wanted me to be the responsible daughter one last time. They wanted me to clean up the mess quietly, to mortgage my own integrity to keep their illusion alive. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of my car keys. Maris was right. I wasn't fighting for the estate. I wasn't fighting for the title of CEO. I was fighting for the right to look in the mirror. I pulled out my phone. I dialed Tessa. Tessa, I said when she answered, I need you to set up a meeting. With who? She asked. Maris. No, I said. With the board, all of them, and tell them to bring their lawyers. Vivian, Tessa said, her voice warning. If you do this, there is no going back. You are declaring war on your own blood. I know, I said. I looked at the river, dark and moving fast. But the dam is breaking. Tess, and I am the only one willing to open the floodgates before the whole valley drowns. Okay, she said after a pause. When? Tomorrow night, I said. After hours, in the conference room. I want Mason there. I want my parents there, and I want Maris Vane on speakerphone. You want Maris there. She is the judge, I said. I am just the prosecutor. I hung up. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Rory. Drive is in the box. I am sorry. I stood up. The air was cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt a strange, terrifying calm. I was done being the silent partner in my own family. It was time to make some noise. The conference room on the executive floor was designed to intimidate. It was a cavern of glass and polished mahogany, dominated by a table long enough to seat 20 people. At 8 o'clock at night, with the rest of the building dark and the rain drumming a relentless rhythm against the floor-to-ceiling windows, it felt less like a place of business and more like a courtroom. I arrived 15 minutes early. I set up the space with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an amputation. I placed a single folder at each of the 4 seats at the head of the table. I connected my laptop to the main screen, but left it blank. I placed the flash drive Rory Baines had given me in the center of the table, a small silver object that contained enough data to send my brother to prison. Then I sat down and waited. My father was the first to arrive. Franklin Brooks looked older than I had ever seen him. The walk from the elevator seemed to have winded him. His skin had the texture of parchment, and his left hand was tucked into his pocket, hiding the tremor I knew was there. He didn't look at me. He walked to the head of the table and sat down, staring at the rain streaking the glass. My mother, Elaine, came next. She was wearing a raincoat over her shoulders like a cape, her face pale and drawn. She looked from Franklin to me, her eyes pleading for a truce that I could not offer. She sat next to Franklin, reaching out to touch his arm. He didn't react. Mason arrived last. He pushed the heavy glass door open with a flourish that felt manic. He was wearing a suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. He carried a coffee cup and an air of forced nonchalance that made my stomach turn. "So," Mason said, dropping into the chair opposite me. "The Inquisition begins. Is this really necessary?" Viv. Dragging Mom and Dad out in the rain because you are still sore about the birthday dinner. "Sit down, Mason," I said. My voice was calm. It sounded strange to my own ears, detached and cold. "I am sitting," he said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Let's get this over with. I have a dinner reservation at 9. "Cancel it," I said. I stood up. I didn't pace. I stood at the end of the table, commanding the room not with volume, but with silence. "We are here because the company is dying," I said. "And tonight, we are going to decide whether we let it die, or whether we cut off the limb that is killing it." "Oh, for God's sake," Mason scoffed. "Drama. Always drama with you." "No speeches," I cut him off. "No manipulation. No stories about legacy or vision. Only facts. Tonight, we deal in facts." I tapped a key on my laptop. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. A photo appeared. It was a high-resolution image of the strip mall I had visited the day before, the laundromat, the liquor store, the faded sign for the mailbox rental shop. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is the global headquarters of North Pine Strategies." The room went silent. Mason's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, fixed and brittle. "So," he said, "they are a lean operation. They work remotely. That is how modern consulting works. Vivian, you wouldn't know. You are stuck in the past." $30,000 a month, I said. "That is what we pay them, for consulting services. I visited this address yesterday. The clerk confirmed that North Pine is nothing but a 10-inch metal box, Box 404. There are no consultants. There is no staff." I tapped the key again. A new image appeared. The bank registration document Tessa had pulled. "North Pine was incorporated 14 months ago," I continued. "The initial filing fee was paid from a personal account at Harbor Glen Community Trust." I looked directly at Mason. "It was paid by you." "Mason?" Mason shifted in his chair. I fronted the setup costs. It is standard. I was facilitating the vendor relationship. "You own it," I said. "You set up a shell company. approved it as a vendor, and have been approving invoices for services that were never rendered. That is not facilitating. That is embezzlement. That is a lie, Mason shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You are twisting everything North Pine provides strategic oversight. They send reports. I checked the server logs, I said, my voice cutting through his shouting. The only reports uploaded by North Pine were created on your laptop. Mason, I saw the metadata. You wrote them. You wrote garbage reports full of buzzwords to justify paying yourself $30,000 a month. I turned to Franklin. He was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He looked like he had been struck. Dad, I said gently, you signed the override. Darren told me. You approved the North Pine contract because Mason told you they were turnaround experts. You let him steal $500,000 because you wanted him to have a win. Franklin closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He just breathed, a shallow, rattling sound. It is not stealing, Mason insisted, though his voice was higher now, bordering on hysterical. It was compensation. For the work I was doing off the books, the deals I was bringing in, I needed capital to grease the wheels. What deals, Mason? I asked. The company is bleeding. Revenue is down 12%. Revenue is up, he yelled. Look at the Q3 report. We are up 7%. I reached for the flash drive in the center of the table. I held it up. This is from Rory Baines, I said. It contains the raw accounting logs from the last 6 months. It shows every manual entry where you and Darren reclassified operating losses as deferred vendor obligations. You took the bills for steel, for power, for the North Pine theft, and you hid them on the balance sheet so they wouldn't show up as expenses. You didn't make a profit. Mason, you just decided not to count the losses. I threw the flash drive onto the table. It slid across the mahogany and stopped in front of Franklin. It is fraud, I said. Plain and simple. If the bank sees this drive, they call the loan. If the suppliers see it, they stop shipping. If the authorities see it, you go to jail. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The rain outside seemed to get louder. Franklin picked up the flash drive. His hand was shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He looked at it as if it were a poisonous insect. Mason, Franklin whispered. His voice was a dry husk. Is this true? Dad, listen, Mason said, leaning forward, sweat glistening on his forehead. It is bridge accounting. Everyone does it. I was going to fix it next quarter. I just needed one good quarter to stabilize the transition. I did it for you to show the board the plan was working. You cook the books, Franklin said. The realization washed over him, taking the last of his color. You lied to me, every week, when I asked about the margins, when I asked about the cash flow. You looked me in the eye and lied. I was protecting you, Mason cried. You were sick. Mom said you couldn't handle stress. I was handling it. By stealing? I asked. By putting Mom's house at risk. Mason froze. He looked at Elaine. She knows, I said. She told me about the loans. Mason, she told me she co-signed because you were in trouble. Elaine let out a sob. She covered her mouth with her hand, looking away from her son. Mason, I said, softening my tone just enough to twist the knife. I looked into the registered agent for North Pine, Sentinel Corporate Services, but I dug deeper. The contact name for the account isn't you. It is a man named Julian Vane. Mason went white. No relation to Maris, I said, but Julian Vane is a known operator in the wealth mentorship circuit. He runs seminars on alpha investing. He finds insecure men with access to family money, and he teaches them how to funnel it into high-yield vehicles that never yield anything. I walked around the table until I was standing right behind Mason's chair. You aren't a mastermind, Mason, I said quietly. You are a mark. This Julian guy convinced you to set up North Pine. He convinced you to funnel the money out. How much of that $30,000 a month did you actually keep, half less? Mason slumped. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. He put his head on the table, burying his face in his arms. He said it was temporary, Mason mumbled into his sleeve. He said he had a crypto arbitrage algorithm. He said we would double the money in 3 months and I could pay the company back before anyone noticed. I wanted to be the one who brought in the big money. I wanted to be better than you. He lifted his head, looking at me with red, wet eyes. You were always perfect, Viv, he said, his voice full of childish resentment. Dad always asked you for the details. He always trusted your numbers. I just wanted him to look at me like that, just once. I felt a pang of pity, but I strangled it. Pity had allowed this to happen. Pity was a luxury we couldn't afford. So you lied, I said. And because you lied. The silent partner walked away. I turned to Franklin. He was staring at his son with a look of absolute devastation. Dad, I said, you told me you announced the succession to reassure the stakeholders. You thought naming Mason would stabilize the company because you knew you were getting sicker. You filed the amendment to the trust because you were terrified of incapacity. Franklin nodded slowly. I had to ensure continuity. The doctors, they gave me a timeline. But you didn't read the agreement, I said. Maris Vane's agreement. It had a specific clause about public succession declarations. When you announced Mason, a man with secret debts and no competence, you triggered a default. You didn't reassure the partner. Dad, you evicted her. Your attempt to save the company is exactly what killed it. Franklin looked at me, and I saw the horror in his eyes. He realized the irony. His frantic, fearful maneuvering had caused the very disaster he was trying to prevent. She withdrew because of me, Franklin whispered. My fault. Yes, I said. It is. Elaine stood up suddenly. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Stop it, she cried. Vivian, stop it. Look at your father. You are killing him. Is this what you wanted to humiliate us, to prove you were right? I am trying to save us, Mom, I snapped, losing my cool for the first time. This isn't a debate club. This is $5 million gone. This is fraud. If I don't fix this tonight, the sheriff comes to padlocks the doors on Monday. We are family, Elaine pleaded, reaching for Mason, who flinched away from her. We fix this together. We don't destroy each other. Can't we just pay it back? Can't we just hide it? Hide it, I repeated, incredulous. Mom, we are past hiding. The money is gone. The books are cooked. And Maris Vane knows. Maris Vane is a stranger, Elaine shouted. Mason is your brother. Family doesn't mean shielding one person while everyone else pays, I said, my voice shaking with the effort to stay steady. Family doesn't mean letting 400 employees lose their livelihoods just so Mason doesn't have to feel bad about being a failure. I am done protecting him, Mom, and you should be too. I walked back to the head of the table and pressed a button on the speakerphone. Tessa, I said. You are on. The line crackled. Tessa Marlowe's voice filled the room, sharp, professional, and devoid of emotion. Good evening, Tessa said. I have heard the summary of the evidence. I am speaking to you now not as Vivian's friend, but as an officer of the court. Mason looked at the phone, terrified. The actions described constitute felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and falsification of corporate records, Tessa stated. Under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the executives who signed off on these reports face up to 20 years in federal prison. Furthermore, the board of directors has a fiduciary duty to act immediately upon receiving notice of such irregularities. If they do not, they become personally liable for the shareholder losses. What does that mean? Franklin asked weakly. It means, Tessa said, that if this is not self-reported and corrected immediately, and if the company collapses, the creditors can pierce the corporate veil. They can come after your personal assets, the house, the retirement accounts, the trust, everything. Elaine gasped. Thank you, Tessa, I said. Stay on the line. I looked at the three of them, my family, the people I loved, who had spent my entire life telling me to wait my turn. Here is the plan, I said, and it is not negotiable. I slid a document from my folder across the table to Mason. This is a letter of resignation, I said. Effective immediately. You are stepping down due to personal health reasons. You will sign it now. Mason looked at the paper, then at Franklin. Franklin didn't look up. I also have a confession of judgment, I said, sliding a second paper. You admit to the unauthorized withdrawal of funds via North Pine. You agree to repay the full amount. We will structure it as a loan repayment so you don't go to jail immediately, but you will pay back every cent. Mason, even if you have to work the assembly line for the rest of your life. Vivian, Mason whispered. Please. Sign it, I said, or I call the police. I have the drive. I have the photos. I will not hesitate. Mason picked up the pen. His hand shook, but he signed. He signed the resignation. He signed the debt. He was crying silently, tears dripping onto the mahogany. Dad, I said, turning to Franklin. I slid a document to him. This is a revision to the family trust, I said. It revokes the amendment you filed 3 months ago. It removes Mason's power of attorney, and it installs an independent trustee me to oversee all company assets until the audit is complete. Franklin looked at the document. He looked at me. You are taking the company, he said. Coup d'etat. I am saving the company, I corrected. I am the only one who can. Maris Vane told me she might consider re-entering, but only if the ethical breach is cured. I am the cure, Dad. I am the only leverage you have left. And if I don't sign? Franklin asked. There was a flicker of the old defiance in his eyes. Then I walk, I said. I walk out that door, and I take the evidence with me. I send the flash drive to the board. I send the invoices to the IRS, and I watch the fire from a safe distance. Franklin stared at me. He looked frightened, not just of the scandal, but of me. He had raised a responsible daughter, a peacemaker, and he was suddenly realizing that the same traits that made me good at cleaning up messes made me terrifyingly good at ending them. He was afraid of losing his identity. He was the man who built Brooks' crown. If he signed this, he was just an old, sick man who had been saved by his daughter. I built this, he whispered, brick by brick, and you are knocking it down, I said. Sign the paper. Dad, be a father for once, instead of a CEO. He hesitated for a long, agonizing minute. Then, slowly, he picked up the pen. He signed his name. It was a shaky, jagged scrawl, nothing like the bold signature that adorned the plaques in the lobby. I took the papers. I put them in my folder. Tomorrow morning, I said. The board meets. We announce Mason's resignation. We announce that I am taking over as interim CEO to conduct a strategic review. We announce a forensic audit. It will be painful. The stock might dip, but we will survive. I looked at Tessa's name on the screen. Tessa, draft the board resolution. Have it ready by 7 a.m. On it, Tessa said. The line clicked dead. The meeting was over. Elaine was weeping softly, holding Franklin's hand. Franklin was staring at the wall, a hollow shell. Mason stood up. He looked younger, smaller. The suit looked like a costume. He walked to the door, then stopped. He turned to look at me. His eyes were dry now, and there was something new in them. Not anger, not sorrow, something cold. You think you won, Mason said quietly. I did what I had to do, I said. You think Maris is the threat, Mason said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room. You think she left because of the money, or the lies. She left because of the character clause, I said. Mason smiled. It was a bleak, terrible smile. You don't know what she asked Dad for, he said. Years ago, when the deal was first signed, Dad didn't just promise her a partnership. He promised her something else, something personal. He glanced at Franklin, who had gone rigid in his chair. Ask him, Mason said. Ask him what the real price of the $5 million was. It wasn't interest. Vivian, it was you. Mason turned and walked out into the dark hallway, leaving the door swinging behind him. I stood there, the folder of signed confessions in my hand, and looked at my father. He wasn't looking at the rain anymore. He was looking at his hands, and for the first time, I saw a shame so deep it looked like it was eating him alive. "Dad," I said, "what did he mean?" Franklin didn't answer. He just closed his eyes and let his head drop, as if the strings holding him up had finally been cut. The drive back to Lake Eleanor felt different this time. The first trip had been driven by curiosity. This one was driven by a cold, hard need for finality. Mason's words were ringing in my ears like a tinnitus that wouldn't fade. "You don't know what she asked Dad for." I arrived at Maris Vane's property just as the sun was breaking through the heavy cloud cover, casting a blinding, fractured light across the water. The man in the dark suit didn't try to stop me. He saw my face and simply stepped aside, opening the heavy oak door before I even reached the threshold. Maris was inside this time, sitting in a library that smelled of old paper and lemon polish. She was reading a hardcover book, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She closed the book gently as I walked in. "You are back," she said. "I assume the family meeting was productive." "Mason resigned," I said, standing over her desk. "He signed a confession of judgment. The board meets tomorrow to formalize it. You got what you wanted. Maris, the rod is cut out." "And Franklin?" she asked. "He signed the trust revision. I am the trustee now." "Then you have won," she said, removing her glasses. "Congratulations. Vivian, you saved the kingdom. Mason said something to me before he left," I said. I watched her face closely. "He said, I didn't know the real price of your money. He said Dad promised you something personal. He said the reason you had so much power wasn't just because of the cash, it was because of me." Maris looked at me for a long time. Her expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Sit down, Vivian." "I prefer to stand." "Sit down," she commanded, her voice sharpening. I sat. "Your father came to me 5 years ago because the banks had closed their doors to him," Maris began. "The company was over-leveraged. He needed $5 million to retool the factory, or he was going to miss a major contract cycle. But I don't lend to desperate men without collateral. He put up the equity," I said. "Equity in a failing company is worthless," Maris corrected. "I asked for control. Specifically, I asked for influence over the succession plan. I told him I would only invest if I approved the next CEO, and he agreed. He did, but we had a debate about who that should be. I told him, 5 years ago, that you were the only logical choice. You were running operations. You were the only one reading the contracts. I told him to name you then and there." My heart hammered against my ribs. "And what did he say?" "He said no." I felt the air leave my lungs. "He said no. He told me you were rigid," Maris said, choosing the word carefully. "He said you were too honest for the heavy lifting. He told me he couldn't trust you to protect the family name if things got difficult. He said if you found a skeleton in the closet, you wouldn't bury it, you would put it on the front porch. He was terrified of your integrity. Vivian." I stared at her, stunned by the absolute, crushing irony. "He excluded me because I was ethical," I whispered. "He excluded you because he knew he was already compromising the business," Maris said. "He knew he was moving money around. He knew he was hiding things. He needed a successor who would be complicit in the lie. He knew Mason was weak enough to be molded. He knew you were strong enough to judge him." She leaned forward. "So we made a deal. I gave him the money, but I took the character clause as my insurance policy. I told him, fine, try to groom the boy." All I could see was my father's face at the birthday dinner. The way he had looked past me when he toasted Mason, too honest for the heavy lifting. He hadn't rejected me because I wasn't good enough. He had rejected me because I was too good. He had looked at his 2 children and chosen the one who would help him lie. I pulled into the driveway, The house was quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the world scrubbed clean and raw. I found Franklin in the sunroom. He was sitting in his leather armchair, a blanket draped over his legs. He wasn't reading. He wasn't watching television. He was just staring at the dust motes dancing in a shaft of afternoon light. He looked frail. The titan of industry who had terrified Darren Holt and charmed the Chamber of Commerce was gone. In his place was a tired, sick old man. I walked in and stood in front of him. I didn't yell. I didn't feel the need to yell anymore. Yelling is what you do when you want to be heard. I knew he heard me. I was the only thing loud enough to break through his denial. "Maris told me," I said. Franklin didn't blink. "I assumed she would." "You told her I was unreliable," I said. "You told her I wouldn't stay loyal to the family image." He looked up at me then. His eyes were watery, rimmed with red. "Was I wrong?" "Excuse me. Look at where we are. Vivian," he said, his voice raspy. "You have the files. You have the confessions. You're about to go to the board and strip your brother of his name and your father of his legacy. You are doing exactly what I feared you would do. You are putting the truth above the family." "I am putting the truth above the crime," I said, my voice shaking with controlled fury. "You didn't want loyalty, Dad. You wanted complicity. You wanted a co-conspirator." "I wanted to survive," he snapped, a flash of his old temper flaring up. "I built this company from a garage. I carried it on my back for 40 years, and when I got sick, when the numbers started to slip, I just needed time. I thought if I could just hold it together for a few more years, I could fix it. I could pay off the debts. I could leave you both with something clean." "So you picked Mason," I said, "because you knew he wouldn't ask questions." "I picked Mason because he needed me," Franklin said. You never needed me. Vivian, you were always so self-sufficient, so sharp. You looked at me like you were grading my performance. It was exhausting." He slumped back in the chair. "Mason looked at me like I was a god." Franklin whispered. "He believed everything I said. When I told him the company was strong, he believed it. When I told him we could fix the numbers, he believed it. I thought if I named him the heir, it would make it true. I thought if we just acted like a successful dynasty, we would become one." "That is magical thinking, Dad," I said. "That is a fairy tale, and it cost $5 million. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said, tears spilling onto his cheeks. "I was trying to hide from you. I didn't want you to see me fail. I didn't want you to see that the great Franklin Brooks was just a man juggling loans and lying to his bankers." "Well," I said, "I see you now." He covered his face with his hands. "I know." I looked at him, and the anger finally broke, leaving behind a vast, empty sadness. He had destroyed everything his company. His son, his relationship with me, not out of malice, but out of shame. He was so afraid of being seen as weak that he had become something far worse. "I am going to see Gideon Pruitt," I said. "I am going to hand over the evidence. I am going to ask the board to place you on medical leave." He nodded behind his hands. "Do what you have to do." "I am," I said. "I am doing the heavy lifting." Finally, Gideon Pruitt was the chairman of the board. He was a man of few words and iron principles, a retired judge who had served on the Brooks Crown Board for 15 years. He lived in a brownstone in the historic district. I sat in his study, the manila envelope of evidence on the desk between us. Gideon read through the documents in silence. He read the resignation letter. He read the confession of judgment. He read the North Pine registration. When he finished, he took off his reading glasses and folded his hands. "This is catastrophic," he said. His voice was grave. "It is recoverable," I argued, "but only if we act now. Immediate disclosure to the bank, a forensic audit to quantify the exact loss, and a leadership change that signals a complete break from the past." "You want the interim CEO role," Gideon said. "I am the only one who knows where the bodies are buried," I said. "And I am the only one Maris Vane trusts. She has agreed to conditionally reinstate the funding, provided I am the one managing the recovery. Gideon looked at me. Your father. This will destroy his standing in the community. We will have to release a statement. Health reasons cover a lot of ground. But people talk. Let them talk, I said. Rumors are better than indictments. If we self-report and restructure, we can avoid criminal charges for Dad. We can frame it as a lapse in oversight due to illness. But Mason has to go, completely. And the vendors? Gideon asked. The deferred obligations. We pay them, I said. We use Maris's capital to clear the accounts payable immediately. We stop the bleeding. We take the hit on the PL this year, skip the dividend, and rebuild trust. Gideon nodded slowly. You have thought this through. I have had 10 years to think about how I would run this company. Gideon, I said, I just never thought I would have to pry it out of my family's hands to do it. Very well, Gideon said. I will call an emergency session for 8 a.m. tomorrow. Be there. The boardroom the next morning was cold and quiet. The rain had returned, a gray drizzle that matched the mood around the table. The 6 board members sat in stiff silence. Franklin was not there. I had told him to stay home. Elaine was there, sitting in Franklin's usual seat, looking small and terrified. Mason was there, sitting at the far end, looking like a ghost. Gideon Pruitt called the meeting to order. We have received a packet of evidence regarding significant financial irregularities, Gideon began. Given the severity of the situation, we are moving immediately to a vote on a leadership restructuring. Mason stood up. He looked desperate. Wait, he said. Before you vote, I just want to say, there is context here. The North Pine payments, they were authorized. My father knew. He approved everything. I was following orders. He was throwing Franklin under the bus. Even at the end, he was trying to survive by shifting the blame. The evidence suggests you initiated the scheme, Mason, Gideon said coldly, and that you personally benefited from the shell company. But Mom knows, Mason cried, turning to Elaine. Mom, tell them Dad wanted me to do whatever it took to keep the stock price up. Tell them I was just trying to help. All eyes turned to Elaine. My mother sat there, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She looked at Mason, her golden boy, the son she had leveraged her home to protect. Then she looked at me. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. Elaine took a deep breath. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. Mason, she said softly. Stop. Mom, Mason pleaded. Your father is sick, Elaine said, her voice trembling but clear. He has heart failure. He wasn't thinking clearly. But you knew what you were doing. You took the money. You lied to us. Mom, I have co-signed 4 loans for you in the last year, Elaine said to the room. Personal loans. Because Mason told me the company wasn't paying him enough to cover his investment losses, I leveraged the family home. The board members gasped. Gideon's eyes went wide. I will not lie for you anymore. Mason, Elaine said, tears sliding down her face. I love you, but I will not let you blame your father for your theft, and I will not let you destroy this company. Mason stood there, his mouth open, betrayed by the one person he thought would never turn on him. Thank you, Mrs. Brooks, Gideon said quietly. The board moves to accept the resignation of Mason Brooks and to appoint Vivian Brooks as interim CEO. Effective immediately. All in favor. 6 hands went up. Motion carried, Gideon said. Mason looked around the room. He realized it was over. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just picked up his briefcase and walked out. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Elaine. He just vanished into the hallway, a man who had finally run out of other people's money. The next week was a blur of audits, legal briefs, and difficult conversations. I met with the union representatives. I showed them the real books, or at least the parts they needed to see. I told them the company was safe, but that belt-tightening was coming. They respected the honesty. They agreed to a temporary freeze on bonuses in exchange for a guarantee of no layoffs. I met with the suppliers. I personally called the steel distributors and apologized for the payment delays. I authorized the wire transfers using Maris's reinstated funds. I met with Maris. She joined the board as a voting member. She was tough, demanding, and brilliant. She questioned every expense, every forecast. For the first time in years, the company had real governance. And finally, on a Friday afternoon, I went to the house. The trust documents were ready. The lawyers had drafted the final version, stripping Franklin of his voting rights and placing the estate into a blind trust under my management. It was a formality now, but it required a signature. I found Franklin in the garden. He was sitting on a stone bench, watching the gardener prune the roses. He looked smaller than I remembered. The stress of the last week had taken a physical toll, carving deep lines into his face. "You brought the papers," he said without turning around. "I did," I said. I sat on the bench beside him. He took the folder. He put on his reading glasses. He didn't read the text. He just looked at the signature line. "Mason hasn't called," he said. "He went to stay with friends in the city," I said. "He needs time, Dad. He needs to figure out who he is when he isn't trying to be you. And your mother. She is at the church," I said. "She is finding her own peace." Franklin uncapped his pen. His hand hovered over the paper. "I built this company," he said softly. "It was the only thing I was ever truly good at. I wasn't a great father. I wasn't a great husband, but I could build things." "You built a good foundation," I said. "That is why it survived the storm." "You saved it," he said. "Not me." He signed the paper. He closed the folder and handed it to me. "So," he said, looking at his hands, "it is done. I am retired. I am just Franklin." He turned to look at me. His eyes were full of a vulnerability that broke my heart. "Will you still come?" he asked. His voice was small, like a child asking if they are in trouble. "Now that I am not the chairman, now that I am no longer the man who built all this, will you still visit me?" I looked at him. I saw the fear that had driven every mistake he had made, the fear that he was only lovable if he was powerful, the fear that without the title, without the money, without the legacy, he was nothing. He had traded his integrity to keep that power, thinking it was the only way to keep us. He was wrong. I reached out and took his hand. It was frail and cold, but I held it tight. "I'll stay," I said. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. "I'll stay," I repeated, looking him dead in the eye. "If you stop lying—" The garden went silent. The wind rustled the rose bushes. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an ultimatum. It was a boundary. The new terms of our relationship. Franklin looked at me. He saw the strength in my face, the strength he had feared, the strength he had tried to sideline, the strength that had ultimately saved him. He nodded, a single, slow nod. "Okay," he whispered. "No more lies." I squeezed his hand. "Okay," I said. We sat there in the garden, a father and a daughter, stripping away the titles and the legacies until there was nothing left but the truth. It wasn't a happy ending. It was a real one, and for the first time in the history of the Brooks family, that was enough. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the tangled web of the Brooks family, and I hope you enjoyed uncovering the secrets as much as I enjoyed writing them. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please drop a comment below and tell me which city or country you call home, and if you enjoyed Vivian's fight for the truth. Please consider subscribing to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice, betrayal, and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Franklin deserves forgiveness? Would you have made the same choice as Vivian? I read every comment and can't wait to hear your perspective. Until next time.